So, hi everyone. I'm Rick Hansen, and like a character in a superhero movie, Lori Gottlieb is racing along to get a better internet connection for our, broadcast here. We've had some technical difficulties, I'm sure, as many have had, with the ways in which the networks of various kinds are being, swamped and overloaded by everything. I also love the ways in which, whether it's Anderson Cooper on CNN or some of the correspondents of the BBC, we're getting a whole new window into the lives of other people, in part by what's being demonstrated for us as we try to connect with them. And I think one of the great lessons of all this during this time of Corona is the ways in which we are scrambling and need to be resourceful and flexible and try different things and try new things and accept patiently when things don't go as well as we wanted to. I think back on my father and mother's generation and the kinds of just things they had to deal with. It actually took a while before a letter could arrive unless they spent a lot of money on a telegram with 20 words max. They just had to wait sometimes. And I think about in the world's wisdom traditions, and certainly as a traditional virtue, in the secular world, patience. Patience is definitely something that I've been working on myself. And we tend to get habituated in our modern life to immediate gratification. If we call someone and there's more than 4 or 5 seconds before the call goes through because the cell towers are overloaded or something, why is it taking so long? And in the brain, boy, we get habituated to the rapidity of reward. And that tendency then is exaggerated and developed when we play games or do other things in which there's an immediate responsiveness from the computer or whatever platform we're using with our game. And we get used to it, right? It's kind of like that's how, so now it's echoing through my phone because we were connecting through my phone in the process, and I'm going to quiet it here. Anyway, we get habituated to it. And for me, it creates a kind of inner tyranny in which we have these expectations of reward. The brain is continually generating expectations of various kinds. So we have these expectations of an immediacy of reward that we've been trained in through our culture and our activities and consumerism and media and, just enjoyments of life. So we have this expectation of immediate. And when it's not fulfilled, it's disappointing, frustrating, disturbing. It can feel, it can be kind of disheartening almost, like you're trying to make something happen. So here, Lori Gottlieb, who routinely is on national television, is a very, 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 very well-known and respected therapist and author. Here she is scrambling to, connect with a hotspot and update the latest browser version so every which thing can work together. I'm going to take a bold step and disconnect my phone, which is what I've been using to be in touch with Lori throughout all this. So I'm going to actually end that. So if Lori or Stephanie needs to reach me, we'll keep on going. Maybe we could start, and I can just tell you one of the things that I really appreciate about Lori's work, which is the ways in which, hello, Lori.
There we go.
Oh my God.
Let's see if we can get like some better light here. There we go.
Well, that's great. So I did what I'm always kind of amazed that TV announcers can do. They can kind of fill the air, hopefully, without too much babbling. And I was talking about how these days we can get so used to our expectations or desires being immediately satisfied that if there's any delay and we have to wait for them, anything, and we can get frustrated about it. And in fact, one thing we need to really learn is to reappreciate the virtues of patience. Right.
That's right. And in the spirit of patience, I'm going to close the window here so we get better sound. This is very like coronavirus verite. So just a second.
You got it. That's great. Super. That's super.
All right. There we go.
Yeah. And I was just going to say partly filling air, but also everything I said on air, I believe and feel. And I was about to segue into one of the things I really appreciate about your own work is that among many of its virtues, it's about resourcefulness in all kinds of ways, including in our most intimate relationships, the relationships that we have that are most full of suffering and joy, and also being resourceful inside our own minds and how we react to things, and also as a therapist, a helping professional like me and many others, helping people become more resourceful too over time. So that's
Yeah,
that's the way of introducing you here.
Yeah, well, I think as we were scrambling just a few minutes ago, it was really nice to do that with you. I know that sounds like a strange thing to say, but everybody was just, I think it's like when you have these moments, and we're all going through this moment in the world right now, you have a choice about how are you going to react to these things. And of course, this is a trivial example because it's, we just couldn't get our internet working. But I think it's about, expectations and meeting other people's expectations. And we knew that there were people who were tuning in and they would expect to see us and be disappointed if we were wasting their time and we weren't there. And I think you have to laugh about things like that. It was very funny what we were going through just a few minutes ago. And now, we scrambled and here we are. But I do think that it's important that the perspective and the choice that we make, and I think your book talks a lot about this, is really important in any given moment, that we have a lot of control, even though it feels like we don't have a lot of control over lots of big things. We have a lot of control over what happens internally for us. And that's what I love about your book.
Oh, that's kind of you. As a segue to make a point to ask you a question, so I want to show you the cover. It just came out, and I'm like a parent. You're a parent too, right? And I'm like a parent, my kid, and the cover looks really neat. So you can see the cover. It's got that mountain on it, right? And the subtitle, New Science, Ancient Wisdom, 7 Practices of the Highest Happiness. And there were 7 ways to cultivate these 7 qualities in ourselves, right? Okay. So got the mountain. And one of the central metaphors in the book is the notion of people farther along up the trail, turning around and encouraging us to join them and, in effect, be more like them or learn what they've learned to keep on going and then to increasingly establish that in ourselves. So one of the ways in the body memory I've learned through being in the mountains a lot, including in pretty hazardous, hairy situations, a lot of rock climbing, the rain comes in, now what do you do, right? Is I have kind of a body memory of having a teammate, in this case you, that we're scrambling with, and it's okay. And a little bit of frustration or pressure or something arises. It's okay. It's okay. And there's along the way the sense of camaraderie with another person. So I kind of transfer in that embodied sense of capability and attitude and feeling and relationship paradigm into a situation like this. From my background in rock climbing, I wondered about you. What are some of the things that you draw on, in your, Oprah's, I think, great question. What's one thing you know for sure is true, right? It's kind of like the feeling of that in your own body. So I was just kind of curious, in your own personal story, whatever you care to share, what are some of the experiences you've had in your life that have been challenging for you, that have helped you kind of build up a body sense of resourcefulness that you might draw upon at a time like this?
Yeah. Well, I think my book opens with, a time in my life that was difficult, where I was really, I went through a breakup that I wasn't expecting. And I, was really reevaluating a lot of things about my life at midlife at that time.
Yeah.
And I didn't realize that's what was happening, by the way, which is sort of what, when in my book, where I take people through therapy as both clinician and patient. And I think that process is so valuable to really understand. I think people think of therapy as, something is wrong with you and you have a problem and you go to get fixed. And that's not what therapy is. Therapy is a process of self-discovery. And it's really about people say, I want to go to therapy to get to know myself better. But a lot of therapy is getting to unknow yourself. It's to let go of those limiting stories that you've been telling yourself about yourself. And so, I think that what right now in this moment, what people are discovering is, if you had said to people months ago, you're going to be, nobody's going to go anywhere. The only things that are open are grocery stores and pharmacies, and everyone's going to be masked and gloved. So even when you try to smile at someone, they can't see it. So it looks very kind of, unfriendly. You're going to be afraid. People are going to be losing their lives, their health, their jobs. Kids are not going to see their friends. I think a lot of us would have said, I can't cope with that. Like, I don't know. I would never be able to cope with that. And yet we are doing so well. I don't mean that we aren't struggling or we aren't experiencing, anxiety and loss and grief and all of those things. But I think that what we are discovering about ourselves is how resilient we are, how adaptable we are, how creative we are in the ways that we are finding to connect, to recenter ourselves, to relate better to ourselves and to the people who might be in the same household with us. So I think that when we go inward and discover what's there, I think people are so afraid they're going to find something they don't like. But what generally happens is they find all these things that they didn't know were there and that they like very much about themselves.
Hidden treasure.
Yes. Yes. And so I liked your metaphor about the mountain, because I think people who have sort of gone before us can help us to see something that maybe we can't yet see, but they give us a glimpse into it.
I think that's really true. I mean, I was telling a story a little earlier about when I went to college. I was very young. I was socially awkward. I went to UCLA in 1969. I was 16 when I started, and total neurotic, painfully self-conscious person. And for some reason, I found the courage inside to run for president of my dormitory, Dykstra Hall, for those who know at UCLA. And there were actually 800 people in it and a substantial amount of money to use. So student government was kind of a real thing then. And amazingly, so I won. So here I am. I'm 17 years old. I'm the president of my dormitory. Whoa. And I had to interact with an assistant dean who was in charge of student living. And she seemed so old to me. I think she was maybe 24. And just watch her. Her name was Carol Hetrick. I don't know if she could possibly hear this today. I learned so much from
Carol,
her.
if you're out there.
If you're out there somewhere, you made a big difference for me. And I would just watch how she was. And she would do something in a meeting or interacting with other people. And rationally, like Spock, I could figure it out 5 minutes later what she had done. But by then, everybody had moved on, right? But she just knew how to do it. And I started imagining, what would it be like to be her? What were the attitudes, even the body states that she was in, a kind of deep understanding of other people that she was inhabiting? How could I slowly but surely channel, in a sense, those qualities inside myself? How could I learn from her to grow into that way of being? And in much the same way, I've tried to do the same when I was a rock climber. I would watch people better, and I've tried to do the same with my own teachers and the teachers and various traditions around the world. Like, how do they do that? What's that like to be them? And then increasingly with modern science, we really plausibly can talk about what could well be going on inside the coconut, right? Inside the hardware, inside our own bodies altogether, and then use that information to build up those neural circuits inside ourselves.
Yeah. And I'll bet that what you responded to in her, on the level of the experience in the room without knowing what you go into in your book, was a deep comfort in herself.
That's very true. Very perceptive.
That people who are comfortable with themselves make other people feel comfortable. And people who are comfortable with themselves don't need to be loud to be heard. They know that people will listen to them. They're not trying to get attention. And I think people who are comfortable with themselves relate really well to other people because they're not trying to be liked. They're not trying to get something from the other person. They're trying to be present with the other person in that moment. And so I can imagine why this person was so influential. And one thing that I thought of when you were talking about that was how important it is for people to know that they mattered to us, that Carol, wherever she is, I don't know, maybe she reads your books and remembers you as that kid in the dorm. But I think that one thing that's happened lately, I think when people are reaching out more, because we are trying to do that during this time, I think that some people are saying, I'm going to use this time to tell the people who have impacted me that they've had an effect on me and that it mattered. And whether that's an email or a text or a call, whatever it is, it's so nice to hear. And so I just so appreciated that you knew her. It wasn't like there was this lady, I can't remember her name, that you remembered her first and last name.
Oh, yeah. I can see her in my mind's eye right now. And I think I did appropriately express my gratitude to her. I will say with some amusement, as someone who grew up with very loving while also well-intendedly controlling and fault-finding parents, my very first question to her, I was 17, I met her for the first time in the summer after my freshman year, and I asked her, so what kind of power do you have over us? And because, of course,
as a therapist, I'm all over that question.
Yeah, I think it's an honest question to kind of name it. Like, let's get real here. I'm a student, you work for the university. This is the late 60s, early 70s. Power is really interesting. And she was great. I totally remember how she was. She blinked. And you could just tell, you could feel like the little thought balloon was game on, And then she said the truth. She said, well, some, but we try not to use it. She was a very wise person. And right there, I think we connected. I was straight with her. She was straight with me. And then, like you said, and she was definitely someone who was comfortable inside herself.
Yeah, that's such good parenting advice too. How much power do you have? Some, but I try not to use it. Yes, you actually have power, but you really want to empower your children. So yes, there is a hierarchy and it has to be there. But you want to give them as much agency over their own lives as you can, reasonably so, depending on their stage of development.
Yeah, and as I rewind that whole episode, just kind of what was happening with myself, there was some willingness in me to name what is often sort of a taboo, which is the power paradigm that we're sitting in some way, authority, power, privilege. And I think there was some blink in her where it was like she enjoyed the fact that I was sort of mentioning the unmentionable and making it explicit rather than implicit. And I think that's something really important to do in general, that kind of courageous willingness to name it, what's being left out of the discourse, and instead, what can we actually name is the truth of things currently. And then to me, that's so much what therapy is about, is naming the unnamed. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think if you don't name it, it comes out in other ways. It comes out in behavioral, ways like a short-temperedness or an inability to sleep or too much food or wine or time on the internet, which a colleague of mine says that the internet is the most effective short-term non-prescription painkiller out there. And that's because you're not speaking something, there's something unspeakable to you. And I think what people find, like the first patient that I introduce in the book is someone I call John in the book. And, he's so insulting. He's so like, all he wants to do is like keep you at a distance. Right.
Yeah.
And people say, well, why would you take him on? He was so abrasive and so unlikable. And I said, because I knew that his behavior was a way of communicating something that he couldn't communicate with words. Yeah. And that's what something unspeakable is it does come out. It just is spoken in a different way. It's not through language as we know it. It's through different kind of language. So I think that when we do speak the unspeakable, most people feel such relief, because all of a sudden it's like whatever catastrophe they thought would happen by speaking this thing that felt unspeakable does not come to pass.
What do you, if you're willing to, you're a very public person, and I don't want to put you on a spot here, but I just kind of wonder if you look out in our society right now, or, the collective, the planet Earth. I mean, the epidemic is spreading around the entire Earth. Certainly we have it in America, then we have it in smaller and smaller communities. What do you feel like are some of the truths that were unnamed or out of sight or minimized that are coming forward to speak or to be spoken about? Do you have one in
Oh,
particular that stands out for you these
I mean,
days?
lots of them. I think that this crisis is bringing to light a lot of things we were maybe speaking about, but not in a way that was meaningful. And I think people are trying to do that now. Race, class, um, you know,
The differential
color,
impacts of illness
yeah,
based on
differential
race and class.
yes,
Yeah.
exactly, exactly. I think I think that the idea of truth and who can we believe, and you know, what happens when people are so divided and they don't want to hear somebody else just because of something else they might believe in, but they don't want to hear some actual information that could be helpful for them, because we're so closed off. We decide, like, you're either with me or you're against me. So, like, you know, we don't listen to one another. We decide who is worthy of being listened to. And if those people are on our side, we'll listen to them. If they're on the other side, whatever that means, we don't listen to them. And we all need to be on the same side, meaning we're all on the side of humanity. We're all on the side of keeping everybody well, right? We all are on the side of working together as a community. I think everybody really believes in that. And then the question is, well, how do we agree on kind of a set of values, a set of facts, and how do we talk about them even if we don't agree? How do we hear somebody else and open ourselves up to other possibilities?
I thank you for that. And, you know, my own observation of things, in a funny kind of way, has been that the unstated truth is really starting to push forward, is that everyone is actually not committed to the common good. And to be committed to the common good, using our hunter-gatherer background even as sort of a template, there's got to be a commitment to common truth, to shared truth, and fair play. Basically, you win, but at least you didn't cheat or lie to win. And when you start to discern that another person or group of people does not share that commitment to the discovery of truth, truth that is common, truth that is shared, and you find that they're very casual about lying or speaking in bad faith or acting in bad faith, or do not have a commitment to fair play. In other words, do not have a commitment to that basic principle of morality that rules for me or rules for you or rules for me, rights for me are also rights for you, right? That basic standard. And when you observe that over time, to me, that needs to get named and surfaced as actually the primary matter. It's not really a matter of, oh, people just disagree or they have different opinions. That's a normal process within a frame of common truth and common justice, common fair play. But when
Yeah.
there isn't that, to me, that then becomes the thing to name rather than chasing one manufactured, made up false claim or false charge after another.
Right. I think, though, that the reason that people don't agree on kind of like shared values around community sometimes, it's not that people are inherently selfish. And I think that's where people go with it. They say, oh, these people are selfish. I think that whenever we do something that that maybe feels like you're not treating other people well, usually it's because we feel like we need to protect ourselves somehow. So it's usually self-protection, and it gets labeled as selfishness because that's what it looks like. And so the question is, you know, sort of what are the people who are not being careful about their fellow humans? You know, what are they trying to protect themselves from? And that's the difference. Like in therapy, we talk about the difference between the content. If you picture like a triangle, right? So up here, the top of the triangle, the apex, that's the content. And then you go down here, the baseline, that's the process. And what people don't talk about enough is the process. This happens on a small level in a relationship, right? That's how, you know, it's like, you didn't do the laundry. What do you mean? I did it this time. Well, did you really? You know, and you're not talking about the process of, you know, who's feeling overwhelmed and those kinds of things. And that's what's happening on a global level here, is everybody sort of blaming everybody else without saying, you know, hey, you know, why is it that some people are willing to endanger the population, right? And it's not because they're bad people, it's because there's something they're trying to protect and we don't quite know what it is. I mean, I have some ideas. We all have some ideas about what it is. But I think nobody's talking on that level. And when the culture becomes a culture of you know, people acting in a certain way, then I think it becomes acceptable. And so you don't have, like, when you talk about that herd mentality, used to be the village, the village would kind of keep you in line, right? Like someone goes out of line and you say, wait a minute, you're endangering the rest of our community here. But when the village starts to kind of change in terms of sort of what's kind of acceptable and what's not acceptable, then I think, we get into the situation that we're in now.
Right. This is really interesting, and we're going to be finishing anyway in a couple of minutes. And like, I think what you're saying is true at one level, and what's been moving more and more forward in my own understanding of things, certainly over the last half dozen years, is the realization that often, I think, the real issue is not at that level. The real issue is at a different kind of level. It's at a frame level. And whether we're working with individuals in therapy or whether we're just doing things in business or we have a neighbor, if we start to realize over time that actually this neighbor or this coworker or whoever is actually not interested in what is true and the discovery of what is true. They're actually not interested in facts. And in fact, they are motivated, and they demonstrate this in their actions over time. They're interested in blocking clarity about what the facts actually are, and undermining the credibility of people who explore facts, discover facts, and share facts with others. You start to observe that over time. And you also start to observe over time in let's say a particular person, they're actually not committed to fair play. They're perfectly comfortable with cheating. They're perfectly comfortable with tilting the playing field any which way they can to win the game. You start to discern that about them over time. And for me, and my nature, my tradition is to continue to have compassion for them and to be very careful of the arrogance of one's own righteous judgment and whatnot, while at the same time, ignorance is the root of our suffering. And being ignorant or deluded to not see this about other people and not realize that that's actually what you're dealing with, for me, leaves out some important things that are very, very relevant. And certainly, this has been the case throughout history. We've always had among us people who just did not share the commitment to telling the truth and playing fair. And to me, it's important to name that and have the courage inside, actually, to name that without letting hatred or righteousness invade and poison us.
Right. Well, that comes up a lot in couples therapy, where there might be one partner who really wants to understand what's going on in the relationship and go into some of those truths about maybe what's not working between them so they can figure out what will work. And the other partner maybe, is really invested in either sort of maintaining the status quo, or just not interested in hearing what the truth might be. And again, we say the truth, meaning there are multiple truths in the sense of perspective. But when somebody doesn't want to hear, maybe an easy example in a couple is like a child is suffering, right? And the parents disagree about how to deal with it. And one parent really does not want to entertain the idea of how much the child is really suffering. And the other parent is trying so hard to get through to that parent about, no, our child really needs these kinds of supports. And those are really tricky situations because you're dealing with like two alternate experiences, and one person is not willing to even hear another experience, right? So that's tough. That's tough.
Yeah. I think as we maybe finish here, just the power in naming it. I think about the ways in which one of the very first things that happens, as you know, in an unhealthy family is that there's kind of a, family secrets, a denial of the fact that, well, actually, Dad is half drunk by dinner every night, but we never ever talk about it. And maybe it could get even creepier. Dad starts doing stuff when he's half drunk by dinner time. And so one of the really important, powerful freedoms is to retain the right inside yourself to see what you see. And as a kid, this was true in my own family background. It wasn't as grievous as the example I'm giving you, but to really realize that, no, it actually isn't like my parents say it is. They're not really feeling what they say they're feeling, and I don't feel what they say I feel, right? And to claim that power, to see what we see, even if it's not safe to say it out loud, at least to say it to ourselves inside our own minds. And then if possible, to say it to another person that's safe to say it with. And then eventually, if we're able to do it, to say it to the person we really need to say it to. To me, that's a very important part of the journey.
Yeah, and I think that's sort of, I think the beauty of adulthood is that I think sometimes people don't realize that they have that freedom. So kids who grew up that way, they don't realize when they become adults that, oh, now you can actually say that, right? And so they hold everything inside, and they don't really say what, something feels off to them, but they feel like they can't really say it because they're replicating the situation that they had growing up. And I think one of the things that is really helpful for adults is when they realize, wait a minute, I'm not in jail anymore. I'm free.
That's great.
I can share my experience, and other people will let me have my experience. They will not try to talk me out of my experience. They will not tell me that what I'm feeling is wrong or inaccurate. There's no such thing really as an inaccurate feeling. A feeling is a feeling. And so I think that's I think the beauty of adulthood is to be able to speak our experience.
Yeah, that's great. Well, Lori, I have your book on my shelf. I don't know if you can see it right there.
Oh, there it is.
Lori
I do.
Gottlieb,
Yes.
right? Maybe you should talk to someone. And it's phenomenal. And I'll say one thing, that our son, Forrest, you were on our Being Well podcast at one point, and Forrest is someone who, he's not quick with praise. And he's at this point read a tremendous amount, including his dad's stuff, of material in this space about psychology and so on. And he just loves your work, loves your book, and everything in it. And he's not a easy audience to impress, and he just raves about it and has recommended to many others. So I'm really happy that you're doing this Facebook Live thing with me. And everybody watching, I highly encourage them to check out your work, including, I think you're going to be writing some other books pretty soon, maybe on the other side of all this.
Right now we're working on the TV series of this book.
That's really great. Oh, that's super.
Yeah.
Well, I'll be finishing up in just a moment here, and I just wondered if you had any final comments or anything you'd like to share as we finish.
No, I just think these conversations are really helpful during this time for a lot of people. I know I like to watch a lot of them, and I'm really glad with your book launch that we're able to chat, because I think there's so much valuable information in your book that's helpful to a lot of people right now. And so thank you for inviting me to have this chat with you, this little lunchtime, at least in California, this lunchtime chat.
That's great. I know. And we scrambled, we made it. And, we made it up our own we took a few steps. We've got to take a few steps, at least, up our own personal mountain of awakening here, bit by bit. Well, thank you again, Lori. I'm going to wrap it up here, but this was great. Take good care.
Pleasure.
Really. Thank you very much. All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.